Thank you, everybody. The less of that nonsense, the more questions we can get in. So happy to have you all here. Thank you. Welcome to any of you who are not members of the Purdue family, and of course to all the Boilermakers who are here. Thanks for coming out to an evening that we've been looking forward to. It's a great thing for any university like ours to have a candidate for President of the United States on the premises, and we're just thrilled that we're about to bring one out here now. I want you to know we've invited all of the three candidates who are on the Indiana ballot. Haven't heard from anybody else yet, but we'd be very tickled if that happened. But if we should get that call, you're all welcome back, and we'll let you know. Now, I want to bring out to meet you one of the more interesting people. Someone told me a long time ago, first duty of a political candidate is to be interesting. And I think this, our guest tonight qualifies. He started a business from nothing, built it to the biggest contracting firm in his home state. 2 terms as governor, during which he left the state much better than he found it, but it was an interesting time. He is reported to have vetoed more bills than the other 49 governors put together during his 2 terms. He's a triathlete. He has climbed the tallest mountain on 7 continents, which must be close to all of them. And incidentally, he is the Libertarian candidate for President of the United States. Please welcome Governor Gary Johnson.
Mitch came out here, and I'm thinking, same experience that I have in New Mexico. New Mexico, people actually wave at me with all 5 fingers, not just one.
As with the other of our recent guests, we gave the governor the opportunity to either give a talk and then take your questions, or to do a little duet with me, and then we'll take your questions. So he opted for this, and we'll use the first maybe 20 minutes or so. I assume we have microphones. We do. And so somewhere along about that time, those of you who can summon the nerve, please come to the mics, and we'll let you take over the questioning. And you heard me say questioning. I'll remind you about that when the time comes. Let me start with the question I'm really most interested in. What's harder, the Ironman or climbing Mount Everest?
I do think that life is, they're the same. One foot in front of the other, and that's the lives that we all live. I do think that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it's something that we should just all plan on. And it's how we deal with adversity that ultimately determines success. So just plan on anything that can go wrong, will go wrong. For a lot of people, that's curling up in a ball and saying, I'm a victim and I give up. But for me, and I think for all of us, we just need to get a smile on our face and get after it tomorrow. So I'm the get a smile on your face and get after it tomorrow guy.
Even if it's 29,000 feet above sea level?
Even if it's 29,000 feet above sea level, yeah.
Governor, can we just start? Would you just give the crowd a brief synopsis of your philosophy, the one that has led you into public life, or that you operated by, and the one that led you to this candidacy?
Well, I think right now that first of all, Bill Weld and I are on the ballot in all 50 states. There's no other, yeah. Nobody else can lay claim to that, and I think that we're speaking on behalf of the majority of Americans. I think we're speaking on behalf of 60% of Americans when I say the following: that we are fiscally responsible, that we're for smaller government, that when government taxes you or I, that's money that we could be spending on our lives as opposed to government telling us how to live our lives. We're socially inclusive. That means that I think all of us want the freedom and liberty to make choices in our own lives, period, as long as those choices don't put others in harm's way. I'd also add to that I think the majority of Americans right now are skeptical of our military interventions, that when we involve ourselves in regime change, that things have worked out worse, not better. And without exception in my lifetime, I can't think of a single example of it ever working out. And then lastly, and this may take a bit of a sales pitch, but I do believe that free trade is what most of us, or that what we really want. And free trade is not crony capitalism. Free trade is absent of government interference. Pay to play is government interfering itself in the market. So we're the only free trade candidates in this race also. So
all right.
There it is.
Let's try what I'll call a sort of a lightning round. You have a very interesting combination of views, a little different than the candidates we've come to know in the two major parties. Can we go quickly through just give a short answer, and then the audience is invited to press you or to drill in on them in more detail. You just surfaced the first one, so let me just double check. Should we have intervened in Afghanistan?
By intervened in Afghanistan, we were attacked, we attacked back. I supported Afghanistan. But after 7 months of being in Afghanistan, we wiped out Al-Qaeda. We should have gotten out after 7 months. I think we should get out tomorrow. And the consequences of getting out tomorrow will be the same as the consequences if we get out 20 years from now. And I think that we can more than mitigate that situation tomorrow.
Same answer for Iraq?
No. With regard to Iraq, I said at the time, we have the military surveillance capability to see Iraq roll out any weapons of mass destruction. And if they do that, we can deal with it if, in fact, that happens. So I was against the invasion of Iraq.
Hey, Syria? That's where that Aleppo is.
Aleppo. Thank you.
He invited me to say something about Aleppo.
Syria is regime change, and I oppose regime change. So Aleppo, at the epicenter of what's happening in Syria, and please, if I'm wrong on any of this, follow up with your question, but let's see, we've got the eastern side of Aleppo, which is the Syrian regime, Assad, and they are fighting the Free Syrian Army, which we support, but they're allied with Islamists that we don't support, and so we arm the Free Syrian Army, and those arms end up in the Islamists' hands. And then we've got Raqqa to the north, which is ISIS, which was really created when we invaded Iraq and all of Saddam's henchmen fled to that area. And ISIS was a term, of course, we didn't even hear until a couple of years ago. But we're supporting the Kurds against ISIS. But the Kurds are sideways with our ally Turkey, who isn't such a good ally anymore because we invaded Iraq in the first place. Are you getting just how complicated this becomes when you get involved in a civil war? And as horrible as these situations are, because we got involved in this because the situation was horrible, look how much worse it has become. And I have said now for months that the only way we're going to find ourselves getting out of Syria is to join hands with Russia diplomatically to make this happen. So I applaud Secretary Kerry in the fact that this may come about, but look, we're going to support the Free Syrian Army, and then the Free Syrian Army now is going to turn and fight against those that it has been fighting with, arm in arm. And we paid, this is a lot more than just a few seconds here.
Well,
but we paid Assad at one point. We supported Assad to fight the Islamists. We did that with Bush. It gets more and more complicated, but this is what I would pledge to avoid.
We're going to mark you down as skeptical. Drug legalization.
We should legalize marijuana. In 1999, I was the highest elected official in the United States to call for the legalization of marijuana. We have tens of millions of Americans who are convicted felons that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. I believe, and I have only advocated the legalization of marijuana, and this is since '99, but I do believe that when we legalize marijuana, we're going to come to a quantum leap in understanding. And that understanding is going to start with looking at the drug issue first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
The right to bear arms.
I support the right to bear arms, period. We should be open to a discussion and a debate on how we keep firearms out of the hands of the mentally ill. We should be open to a debate and a discussion on how we keep guns out of the hands of would-be terrorists. As President of the United States, I would love to know what transpired between the FBI and the shooter in Orlando, given that obviously the system worked up to a certain point but then broke down.
Energy subsidies.
I'm opposed to energy subsidies. If you just look at ethanol as an example, I believe it costs more or takes more energy to produce ethanol than it produces. Now, the problem with energy subsidies is that you point at the good, but then you also have to point along with the bad. And energy subsidies under a Johnson administration would be administered 100% correctly, but at some point I'm going to leave office. And I do say that facetiously also. Depending on the person in office, it may be a good thing, but if you allow for subsidies in the first place, which is a distortion of the marketplace, where do you draw those lines? And it might work with a particular given administration, but then it doesn't work with the next administration.
The death penalty.
As governor of New Mexico, I reversed myself on the death penalty. I always thought I do still believe in an eye for an eye. But what I came to recognize is that the error rate on the death penalty may be as high as 4%. I don't want to put one innocent person to death to punish 999 that are guilty, much less 4 to death where 96 are guilty. When I was governor of New Mexico, Governor Ryan from Illinois ordered a review of 36 inmates on death row, and because of DNA testing, they were able to categorically prove that over 20 of them were innocent and they were released from prison. This is flawed public policy. It costs more to put a person on death row than it does to lock them up for the rest of their lives because of the attorney fees involved in the appeals. But when you find out that someone is innocent and released because of those appeals, because of the work by the attorney. What price do you put on that? It's priceless.
So let's finish on a subject that you were dealing with a long time ago as a border state governor, immigration.
We should embrace immigration. We are a country of immigrants. I am speaking as a border state governor, and I will tell you that this whole immigration issue with regard to Mexico is a political boogeyman. It doesn't exist. They are cream of the crop when it comes to workers. The reason why there are 11 million undocumented workers in this country is because the government has made it impossible to get a work visa to come and take jobs that U.S. citizens don't want. We should make it as easy as possible for anybody that wants to come into this country and work to be able to get a work visa, and a work visa should entail a background check and a Social Security card that applicable taxes get paid. Building a wall across the border is just crazy. Wharton School of Business. Let's see, Wharton School of Business. That's where Trump got his degree. Came out with an analysis of economic impact of restricting immigration. It would have a negative impact on our economy. They came out with an analysis of let's increase work visas for high-skilled workers. That would have a small positive impact on the economy. Let's dramatically increase immigration. That would have a very positive effect on the economy. Let's not forget that these are hard-working people who are buying homes, cars, food, clothing. They are contributing to welfare, Medicaid, Medicare. They're contributing to our Social Security in this country. It's a good thing.
Let me just go a step. Just to go one step further, you've been quoted as saying that economic freedom requires the unrestricted movement of people as well as capital across borders. Now, that's a pretty expansive statement. Are there some qualifiers on that?
On the work visa, that it should entail a background check because we don't want criminals coming into this country, and a Social Security card so that taxes do get paid. But if the government is in charge of quotas, quotas don't work. No quotas. There will either be jobs or there won't be jobs. And right now, there's a migration occurring into Mexico because right now there are more jobs in Mexico, and there's a 12-year low in immigration coming over from Mexico into this country right now.
So I've got a couple more questions that'll take a couple minutes, I suspect, for the governor to address, but it's not too soon for any of you who are moved to do so to come to the mics, and as I see people there, we'll make the switch. You have called for another rather bold proposal, a 20% reduction in defense spending, some would observe defense spending is now at the lowest level as a percentage of the economy, just over 3% that it's ever been, and that inside of that, a lot of it is now consumed with health care and things that don't directly defend the United States. Are you sure that you could bring off a 20% reduction and still promise Americans they were safe?
Well, first of all, I've heard those same statistics that here it is, we are at this multi-decade low or decade low when it comes to funding the military, and come to find out it's just not the case. But I will tell you that it's out there and that it's prominent, but it's not the case. Look, we should have an invincible national defense. And There have been 2 polls now in the last 6 weeks among active military personnel, and I am their choice for President of the United States. On top of those things that I mentioned earlier with regard to policy, balancing the federal budget, I think, is important for all of you. So Bill Weld and I are making the commitment that in the first 100 days, we will provide a balanced budget to Congress. Now, Congress has to act on that, but we will give them the template for how that gets accomplished. You cannot balance the federal budget unless Medicaid, Medicare is reformed. And we have our ideas regarding that. You can't balance. Social Security is a whole nother matter, but it's simple compared to Medicaid and Medicare. But with regard to military spending, notice I didn't use the term defense, I said military spending. The BRAC Commission, instigated in the mid-90s to determine base closures in this country, recommended that 25% more U.S. bases could have been closed. This was the Pentagon itself with their commission. We would reinstitute BRAC. Look, we're not going to cut the military and sacrifice military supremacy. We are spending more money on our military, as much money on our military as the rest of the world combined. Do we really need to nuclear weapon-wise be able to blow up the world 20 times over? You know, might 16 do the trick? I'm just, maybe so, maybe so.
We've had previous occasions when I was a little worried that there wouldn't be enough audience interest. This is not one of those, which is great. So let's start taking questions. We'll alternate from that side of this. Here's the admonition. If your first sentence doesn't end in a question mark, please make sure your second one does. We won't have time for speeches, and I'll have to get rude if you try to give them. So please be concise, and let's start here.
So there have been several polls recently that as much as 50% of either of Trump's or Clinton's candidates say they're supporting that candidate just so the other won't win. And my question to you is just how do you plan to reach those voters and try and connect with them?
I want everyone here to know that neither myself nor Bill Weld would be doing this if we didn't absolutely believe that we can win this whole thing. And to all of your friends, coworkers, family that say the same thing, and I know that you hear it, a wasted vote is voting for somebody you don't believe in. That's a wasted vote. And we do believe we are going to be in the presidential debates. The Presidential Debate Commission is made up of Republicans and Democrats. Mitch sits on the Presidential Debate Commission. And with perhaps the exception of Mitch, everybody else has no interest in seeing anybody but a Republican or a Democrat on that stage. 50% of Americans now, when they go to register to vote, are saying that they are independent. Where is that representation? Look, this has gotten just so far out of kilter that this is a two-party system that needs crashing. And what's there to fear having my voice on that stage?
Over here.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Cash Jackson. I'm just going to ask for just a moment of grace. I'm a 20-year United States Navy veteran. I retired 2 weeks ago.
Thank you.
I represent the Restoring Freedom 2016 campaign. I'm sponsored by the Fathers' Rights Movement. And just to show you how serious we are in helping you to propel yourself onto the national stage or into the debate, sir, we brought you a gift. of 250,000 votes based on how well you answer my question.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Wow.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Over here.
I feel bad. I left my banner at home. I do have a question, though. I'm a network engineer who works for a major telecom company who has significant government contracts. Obviously, when we go back, when you've said about the 20% cut in spending, it makes a lot of salespeople that I know cry because that's a lot of money that they're losing. But my question is really on Wall Street and also with these businesses. When they hear that, what has been the feedback that you have received from these companies with that type of cut, in government spending?
Well, first of all, excuse me. Bill Weld and I are going to provide that template, all right? Does anybody think that the Democrats and the Republicans are going to and Republicans specifically actually want to see a reduction in spending? Maybe. We'll see. But if we just had a 2% increase in spending, just a 2% real increase in spending, coupled with historic economic growth in this country, there would be a balanced budget in 5 years. But I do believe that there is 20% excess in government. And in New Mexico, in 2012, Rick Perry was beating his chest over the fact that he had the best record of jobs of any candidate running in 2012. Well, they did an analysis and it was actually Johnson. And I said then what I say today. I didn't create one single job as governor of New Mexico. Private sector creates jobs, government doesn't create jobs. So a 20% reduction, in my opinion, levels, equal opportunity. I vetoed so many pieces of legislation that really were about giving those that had money and influence more money and influence, as opposed to legislation that could have leveled the playing field for all of us. I do look at the internet here as one of those, this is our future. We're all on equal footing with everyone else in the world. And I am going off on a tangent here. But look, there's all sorts of legislation pending that will give money and influence to those that have already made money and have influence in the internet, as opposed to keeping us on equal footing. That's one of those, government doesn't create jobs, government isn't the economy, it's the private sector. And if you just leave the private sector alone, if you just give them consistency, if you just give them certainty that taxes are not going to go up, if rules and regulations are going to get better, and I'm speaking now not from a health and safety standpoint, but just from a regulatory standpoint of making it easier to live our lives. I can't tell you how many pieces of legislation I vetoed that was just going to add time and money to our lives. So I think the other side of government contracts getting lost is going to be more than made up with the certainty on the private side.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I didn't get to ask my question. I apologize. Sir, I want to know, will you defund Title 4D of the Social Security Act, which takes money from Social Security, incentivizes state courts to take one parent, normally the father, reduces them down to a visitor to justify a child support order so that the state can receive money through Title 4D of the Social Security Act? Because for every dollar that the state is spending in child support enforcement, based on their performance of that collection process, they can then take myself as a father and give me less than 20% of time with my children, and that is resulting in over 20 million American children growing up without a biological parent.
So one of the programs that I had as governor of New Mexico, and no other, actually Frank Keating did it, but he didn't do it his entire 8 years. But for 8 years, I had a policy in New Mexico that I called Open Door After 4, where I met with any resident of the state of New Mexico the third Thursday of every month, starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 10 at night on 5-minute increments. My roundabout story here is that I am aware of just what you're talking about, having talked to hundreds over those years in that same position that you're in. As President of the United States, I will do everything I can to address this inequality that, in fact, does exist. It was an area, as governor, I could do nothing about. It was always court-ordered. It was always after the fact. This is legislation that needs to occur, but like I say, I am in tune with it, and I want to cry over the stories.
So this is, the governor had to impose a 5-minute increment on his open door policy. We don't have a chance, I have to tell you now, of getting to the end of these lines unless we're really very concise, so please.
Obviously, the Electoral College makes third-party candidates have a really difficult time. If you were elected, would you attempt to reform the Electoral College so that it's more friendly to third parties?
It would not be, I would not lead with my chin on that issue, but I would support that initiative.
Hello, my name is Rick Case, and I am not quite sold on libertarianism. I would like to ask a question about what is your opinion on Keynesian economics, and what would libertarianism do, or you as governor do, or you as president do to correct market failures?
Well, certainly market failures exist with regard to free market, but in the case of 2008, those Wall Street firms that made horrible choices should have been allowed to fail. And if I heard you right, you were talking about Keynesian economics?
Yes. Specifically Keynesian economics.
Pardon me?
Specifically Keynesian economics.
Keynesian economics. If I get this wrong, I'm going to be horrified, but this did happen, and I believe it was Hayek that went to the Panama Canal to watch the digging of the Panama Canal, and it was being done with shovels. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Why shovels?" "Well, this is about jobs." And he said, "Well, then why don't you distribute spoons?" We are the most productive country in the world, so I'm the only candidate that supports TPP. I think that ultimately TPP is about high-paying jobs. It is about leveling the playing field. There's certainly maybe aspects of it that I would also question, but I've also pledged to always sign on to anything that will make things better. And I do believe that we are the most productive, smartest country in the world, and that we will continue to be such, but we should take steps in that direction.
Let's go this side.
Governor Johnson, my name is Charles Larrabee, and I'm a senior in history here at Purdue. Now, in your opening remarks and in several of the questions that you have answered, you've stated such things as wanting to cut defense spending and basically decrease America's involvement in the world stage. My question is...
I would argue I don't want to decrease our involvement. Diplomacy to the hilt, free market. That's how you bring the world together.
My question is, though, not through choices of our own, through choices made in our past. As a result of those choices, America is now the world's leading superpower. So therefore, in cases like Russian aggression in the Ukraine and the Baltic, Iran building a bomb, ISIS threatening Damascus, and therefore perhaps gaining stock of massive quantities of weapons of mass destruction. Basically, how would President Johnson maintain the international order that undergirds American prosperity without taking a much more internationalist, possibly even interventionist approach to foreign policy than you would prefer?
Yeah, I would. First of all, we're pledging to honor all treaties and obligations. To take office as President of the United States and not do that, that would just be wrong-headed, in my opinion. But I would argue that, look, we're going to get engaged more than ever before, but we're not going to involve ourselves in regime change. And you don't want to rule out intervention. Look, if we're attacked, we're going to attack back, but that's got to be the criteria for attacking back. And hypotheticals, look, if I am presented with evidence, and by the way, this is what I loved about having been governor of New Mexico. I love the job itself. I love being at the epicenter of making these kinds of decisions because I think I was just born with an overdose of common sense and that I really am value added in all this. But that said, I mean, you have to look at it. So you never say never, ever. But that said, look, I'm going to be the arbiter in chief and just count on somebody who really does have common sense at the head of every single decision. Will it make things better? Over here.
First off, I want to thank President Daniels for allowing this free exchange of ideas, which is a cornerstone of the American Republic. The fact that you allow this makes me proud to be a Purdue graduate, but my question for the governor is really two. One, your stance on the United Nations, would the United States leave? And the second is, on Stossel, you said that, bakers should be forced to make cakes for people that they don't necessarily agree with. Is that a misstatement, or is there a more clear explanation that you'd like to give?
Well, let's see. United Nations. I would stay fully involved in the United Nations. I like the concept of world peace and joining hands and diplomacy. The question had to do with religious freedom legislation that, in my opinion, as I have seen it, is really just veiled legislation that discriminates against the LGBT communities, in my opinion. Specifically regarding the baker, if you, let's see, the Jewish cake baker, the Nazi wants to come in and have his cake decorated. If that were specific legislation, I'd ink that legislation allowing for that discrimination. But I just feel like if you allow for discrimination on the basis of religion, which, by the way, was the basis for discriminating against blacks after the Civil War, and this has been struck down on dozens of occasions by the courts, that we will have discrimination in this country in ways that we've never seen it before, allowing for discrimination that currently does not exist. So that's what I want to stand against. What I stand for is freedom of religion. Look, if you happen to be Jewish and you don't want to host a Christian reception at your synagogue, hey, you shouldn't have to do that. If you belong to a church that does not believe in gay weddings, you do not have to perform a gay wedding in your church. So that is legislation that passed in Utah, really model legislation in Utah, and could be looked at by states nationwide.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. I vetoed hate crime legislation when I was governor of New Mexico. The notion that we're going to be prosecuted on the basis of thought, that scares me to death. Prosecute me because I throw a rock through someone's window, but don't prosecute me because of or don't enhance my sentence because of what motivated me throwing that rock. That's a concept that I think I think it's scary.
So let's go, I think it's the west side, west.
Governor Johnson, you previously addressed your stance on the legalization of marijuana, but I was just curious if you have any strong opinions on the decriminalization of any other scheduled drugs for medicinal or therapeutic purposes.
Well, I do think that that when you look at what we really care about, which is harm reduction, reducing death, disease, crime, and corruption, that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition related, not use related, and that is not to discount the problems with use and abuse. So when you look at overdose of any kind whatsoever, that's quality, quantity unknown. And if we will just begin to recognize that, and recognize that people have health problems, and they're making horrible personal choices, but when you put them in jail over those choices, you've compounded that problem tenfold.
East.
Governor, I read that you support term limits. With a Congress full of career politicians, how would you go about implementing that?
So right now there's, and I'm sorry I'm going to get the name of the group wrong, but I do believe term limits would be a silver bullet on the system. That if you had term limits, politicians would do the right thing as opposed to whatever it takes to get reelected. And I'm a poster child for term limits. I loved being governor of New Mexico. I really did. But the most I was going to be able to serve was 2 terms, and so I felt like I pressed the envelope as much as I possibly could, recognizing that you can only push that so far if you want to get reelected. But then when I got reelected, Katie barred the door. I mean, there's nothing left. So the group in Washington, the term limits group in Washington, has proposed legislation that I have pledged to submit to any member of Congress, which says something like this: do you support term limits in the future if you're grandfathered? You don't have to leave. I think it's a great idea.
Might work.
Might work.
West.
Governor Johnson, I am a resident of Eagle County, Indiana. Hopefully, many of us there can poll for you since we like to choose president, but that's besides the point. I'm also a chronically ill 35-year-old woman whom my government has failed miserably. Where do we cross between the federal and state rights when a woman in Indiana can have an abortion, but I'm forced to put synthetic opiates and benzodiazepines in my body, and I am not allowed to make the choice just for marijuana?
So kind of heard a few things there. The legalization of marijuana will be a state's issue, just like alcohol. That's just the way that it's going to be. There's still dry counties in the United States with regard to alcohol. But as president, I will deschedule marijuana as a Class 1 narcotic that will allow for the research and development that needs to go along with cannabis. Cannabis doesn't kill anybody. There's not been one statistical death that has been registered as a result of cannabis consumption on the medicinal side, directly competing with legal prescription drugs that kill 30,000 people a year. Seems to me that with the research and development that would go along with descheduling marijuana, and it would also address the banking issues in states where it has been legalized, those issues would go away, and we would have the research that, does need to take place.
Thank you, sir.
Governor Johnson, North Korea just conducted their 5th nuclear test Friday. How would you handle that situation?
What I've been saying now for 4 months is that the biggest threat in the world is North Korea, and that at some point these intercontinental ballistic missiles are going to actually work. So the only solution to North Korea is joining hands with China to resolve this diplomatically. That's the only way this is going to happen. We have 40,000 troops in South Korea. There is zero chance that North Korea invades South Korea conventionally. Zero chance. They could start lobbing nuclear warheads over the border. We've got them covered with our umbrella, but am I pointing out to you why this is the most dangerous place in the world right now? It's an opportunity for us to get our 40,000 troops out of South Korea. Imagine if there were 40,000 Chinese troops in Central America. We would be going crazy. But it's an opportunity here to make the world a safer place. Not going to happen without China.
Hello. I know there's been some talk amongst libertarians about if Weld was the correct choice for you. I know Ron Paul was questioning that choice. Can you defend him as your VP candidate and why he's good for a libertarian ticket?
Well, from a personal standpoint, Bill Weld was my political role model. He had served one term prior to my taking over as governor of New Mexico, so we interlapped. And Bill Weld was known as the smartest governor in the room. Bill Weld was known as the fiscally most conservative governor in the United States, according to the Cato Institute. In 1997, Bill Clinton asked Bill Weld to be ambassador to Mexico. And let me refresh your memories, or just tell you about this. But 1997. Jesse Helms blocked his nomination to be ambassador to Mexico in 1997 because Bill Weld was pro-choice, he was pro-gay rights, and he was pro-medical marijuana. This was in 1997. So for me to have Bill Weld as a running mate, this is beyond my wildest dreams or expectations, and I fully believe that half of what is happening would not be happening but for Bill Weld. I think we have an opportunity to actually win. 2 former Republican governors serving in heavily Democrat states, making a name for ourselves being fiscally conservative and socially inclusive.
Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson. My name's Tim Sullivan and I'm an exchange student from Australia. Back home, the cost of my degree costs about the same as 1 year here at Purdue or any other college in America for that matter. And I can get an interest-free loan from the government to pay for that. What are your thoughts on education reform in America?
Well, I would like to point out the number one reason why college tuition is so high, and that is because of guaranteed government student loans. That's my opinion. It's a supply and demand that's been skewed by the fact that all of you have no excuse to not go to college because you can get a guaranteed government student loan. If they never existed, I believe the college tuition today would be half of what it is because colleges and universities would want to fill up their classrooms and they would do the things that they would have to do to fill up those classrooms, namely lower the cost of college tuition. If everybody boycotted college next year because of the high costs, guess what's going to happen to those high costs? They're going to drop dramatically. But I think students have been sold a bill of goods. I think you all are graduating from college with a home mortgage without the home, and that
you're talking about students at other universities.
Students at other universities, right?
Just to clarify.
Just to clarify, yes. And I'll bet this guy's taken some dramatic steps to lower the costs of tuition. You have. I'd also be open, though, to legislation on that we did bail out Wall Street, and I've actually had a number applied to what if all these loans were refinanced and that the interest rate could be something online with Wall Street, and I heard that that number was somewhere in the vicinity of $60 billion, in lieu of the fact that, at least until a couple of weeks ago, this was the number one category of debt in the United States. I think that it's worth looking at. I do. I think it avoids a bigger catastrophe in the future.
We've all heard the discussions about how much you have to work at minimum wage to actually pay for life. I have 3 kids at home. I've lived it. I just recently got out of the poverty bracket myself. I don't know how you feel about raising minimum wage, but if you aren't for it, how do you plan to address that?
Well, what I want to address is that nobody talks about it. And if there's one takeaway from this whole thing from me, it's some advice that I'm about to give you, and it's worth exactly what you're paying for it, which is nothing. But my advice is apply whatever it is you know entrepreneurially. Make your own job. Make jobs for others. So I think the model and government can play a huge role in this, making that much, much easier, when in fact what they're doing is they're making it more and more difficult. I really believe that the model of the future is Uber, Airbnb, it's the sharing economy. I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg regarding the future economy. I think the future economy is Uber everything. It's Uber electrician, it's Uber doctor, it's Uber accountant. It's eliminating the middleman, allowing for you as the provider of goods and services to give them directly to the end user. You end up making more money. End user ends up paying less. It's a win-win for everybody. This way.
Good evening. My name is Lucy Brenton. I'm the United States Senate candidate for Indiana from the Libertarian Party. Shout out to my Libertarian candidate friends. Thank you. In 1986, Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which removed product liability from vaccine products for manufacturers. Since that time, nearly $4 billion has been paid out by taxpayers to tens of thousands of victims of vaccine injury. So my question is from my voting block, which is this: if you are pro-choice about what a woman takes out of her body, are you also pro-choice about what people want to avoid having put into their body?
So vaccines. I support your choice as to whether or not you should be able to have a vaccine. Now, there is conjecture over herd immunization. To my knowledge, and this is a state issue, by the way, to my knowledge, no one is denied opt-out of vaccines anywhere in this country if they so choose to opt out of vaccines.
Unfortunately, California just passed SB 277, and now you cannot take advantage of your right to a public education unless you are also forcibly vaccinated. So we're fighting that.
So I'm not going to sign, but I want to be entire. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything, all right? I want to be really clear as President of the United States. If it's presented to me, if there's a zombie apocalypse, and it's presented to me that unless 100% of the herd is immunized, and it is going to be zombie apocalypse, if that doesn't take place, I'm probably going to sign that. But this is a state issue. It's California's issue. I'm not going to sign off on mandatory vaccine from a federal level, understanding that there aren't any issues nationally regarding this.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank
you. The governor has another event, which we can, so we're going to run over some, but we'll never get to the end of these lines. I can tell the back half at least that have to happen on another occasion. But let's go as quickly as we can, and we'll take as many as we can.
Yeah, so I was hoping you could clear up some discussion about your Supreme Court nomination strategy. Not to pick on social issues, but that was an example of you seem to be against Roe v. Wade, but for Obergefell v. Hodges, and even John Roberts thought that that was too much for the federal government to put a say in.
So are you asking about just the criteria for appointing a Supreme Court judge?
Yeah, the overall philosophy of strict construction or not.
Well, just that, to appoint judges that would look at the Constitution from the standpoint of original intent. And I think original intent, when you boil it down, is limited government. I think that's what it is. It's checks and balances, and it's limited government.
Human-generated gases cause climate change, yes or no? Federal government's support for medical and scientific research, more or less or none? Aid to Israel, more or less or none?
20% less in all those categories. In the first one, I diagnosed with celiac disease. I'm allergic to gluten. Yes, before I found that out, I was contributing to gas emission. Which is another topic also. Celiac disease, the number one undiagnosed disease in the world. There are people in this audience right now who have celiac disease that don't know it. And if you're using antacids, that's a real telltale. That just masks the symptoms of celiac disease. You don't have gas every time you eat. I've never shared this before with what'll be...
You've never faced this erudite an audience before. So I think we heard you say 20% less for Israel, 20%
less for Israel.
For medical research.
Medical research. And that's a 20%. That's the template that we will provide to balance the federal budget.
This way.
Yes, Governor Johnson, I just want you to hear you clarify on this drug policy issue. So would you advocate the Congress adopt Portugal's drug policies with the success that they've had, shifting it from jailing and correctional issue to a public health issue?
I really believe that this will be states' issue, state by state. This is where it's going to happen. But I will be I'll be glad to give testimony anywhere that it's wanted to recognize what's happened in Portugal, to recognize what's happened in Vancouver, to recognize what's happened in Zurich, Switzerland.
Thank you. Hello, Governor. My name is Kyle Stein, and I have a question about working with Congress. So obviously, there's only two parties right now in Congress, both Republican and Democrat, and no Libertarians as of right now. So how would you be able to work with them to make sure the things that you're saying get done, and so we won't have such a polarized Congress?
Maybe this is a good place to end, and there's no reason to end. I can go all. I do love this. Thank you all. But crux question. Look, if we elect Trump or we elect Clinton, does anybody think that the polarization in Congress is going to get any better? Nobody thinks that. Nobody, and rightfully so. It's not. They want to kill each other. Third scenario. Weld and Johnson get elected. Big 6-lane highway down the middle. Appointing an administration made up of Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians. Everybody's going to be libertarian leaning. Really humorously, if you will, standing by the sidelines and calling both sides out for just how, come on, just get it together. Republicans, you want to cut government, you want to make the government smaller, but all I see is eliminating Planned Parenthood. Come on, I think you could make a case that the third scenario I pointed out at least has the possibility of succeeding.
Thank you, Governor. How about we take two more? He's going to bend his schedule for two more, so one from the west and one from the east.
Thanks for hearing my question, Mr. Governor. My name is Christopher Marks. I'm from the Indiana-Miami Nation.
I'm sorry, the
Indiana-Miami peoples, the indigenous peoples that are from Indiana State. What I'd like to ask from you is what preventative measures or corrective measures will you actually take against the states for committing racketeering activities of a federally prohibited nature of kidnapping and extortion through the departments of Title IV, or through the Department of Child Services, wherein they kidnap the people's children and then extort monies from them, even the non-offending parents?
Well, you know, little over. I'm understanding what you're saying to the point that I don't understand what you're saying, but federal role in all this may be if any state is sideways with the United States Constitution, which it sounds like that's the preface for all of this, that's where the federal government does have a role. I do plan on having an open door after 4 policy as President of the United States. I know that sounds pretty audacious, but I do plan on having that. So Mitch will decipher what you've said to me, and at least I'll be educated when we leave stage. Anyway,
Okay.
Thank you.
And we'll take the gentleman in the red shirt right after we get this one, and that'll wrap it up.
Hello, my name is Jeremiah Rice, a resident from West Lafayette, Indiana, and I got a couple of questions, some for myself and a question for this gentleman as well. So hopefully we can share them, I guess, if that's all right. All right, cool, thank you. So my question, because I attended school with a disability known as Asperger's syndrome, a higher functioning version of autism, and I got a couple questions for you. What sorts of plans do you have for education as far as preschool, K through 12, higher education, and do you have any programs for special needs people like with autism or Down syndrome or any of those categories? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. As governor of New Mexico, I was more outspoken than any governor in the country regarding school choice. I proposed a full-blown voucher system in New Mexico for 6 straight years, believing that if we could bring competition to public education, it would vastly improve education. And talking about specific needs in the state of New Mexico, I thought that this was a way to potentially segregate those needs and actually be able to more effectively deliver on those needs. As President of the United States, the Department of Education, let me just for a second, Indiana gives the Department of Education 13 cents. They get, it's your money. You give it to Washington. They send you back 11 cents. How do you like that wash and dry cycle?
That doesn't make sense.
And then they tell you that to get your 11 cents, you have to do A, B, C, D, and E. And to do A, B, C, D, and E, it costs Indiana 15 cents to do it. So why not keep the 6 cents at the very start, not give it to Washington, deal with it in the state of Indiana and 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice, the states, you'll actually have some fabulous innovation. So I'd like to get the federal government out of the educational business completely. And I think most people think the Federal Department of Education was established under George Washington. The Federal Department of Education was established under Jimmy Carter. Really, it's leave it to the states. Education moves forward with great leaps and bounds. Education moves forward with great leaps and bounds when it comes to addressing special needs.
Thank you, Governor Gary, and I hope I can get a picture with you here soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I bet this is going to be a really good one.
Hello, Governor. I'd first like to say thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come here, and secondly, for opening the floor to questioning. My question is, if you were elected as President of the United States, what would be your first order of business on day one as President?
We are pledging that balanced budget, so that's going to be immersion. That's our first 100 days. That's going to be every day. That's going to, how do you... And I did this as governor of New Mexico. You got to immerse yourself in the beans. You got to immerse yourself in the dollars and cents, or nothing moves forward. And I am really a latent bean counter also. I really am. In another life, I was an accountant.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Mitch, thank you.
In that case, I think your current life was an improvement, you know. The accountant probably didn't climb Mount Everest. I would like to observe that first I would like to compliment the audience. That was, I feel secure in saying, the best and clearest and most incisive set of questions any of our recent guests has been asked. So thank you very much for...
Yes.
And then, of course, I want to thank our guests, and I just have to leave you with this observation. Sir, you just gave several, in fact, a string of intelligent, candid, politically risky, unpredictable answers, all apparently grounded in a consistent philosophy. What are you doing in this election? It's not good. Thank you, Governor Gary Johnson. Thanks to each of you.